President Richard Nixon removed the dollar from the gold standard. All right, from the gold standard. Now, what does that even mean? Well, that means that gold had been money for 5,000 years. In 1944, the whole world agreed to go on what's called the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the dollar would be backed by gold. That means, let me explain that for a second. That's a misunderstood term. The dollar was backed by gold. What does that mean to be backed by? Well, the reason why it's backed is debt has to be backed. If you buy a house and you have a loan, that loan is backed by the house. So if you stop paying your debt, they have the house. So debt has to be backed by something. So the dollar, so gold was money. They gave us a paper gold certificate, an IOU. That paper IOU, that gold certificate was backed by the gold in the bank. At any time I want, I can go take that paper certificate, that IOU, and reclaim the gold for it. It was backed by the gold in the bank. If I gave it to you, you could go claim the gold. Okay, so that dollar was backed, that debt instrument was backed by the gold in the bank. But only debt needs to be backed by something. So a lot of times you hear people talk about Bitcoin. Well, what's Bitcoin backed by? Well, you obviously don't understand how money works to even ask that question. So no matter what I tell you, probably won't matter. But only debt must be backed by something. I would just reply with, well, what's Bitcoin backed by? I don't know. What's gold backed by? What's oil backed by? Right? Oil is just oil. Now, oil has value because we give it value because of its utility. Gold has value because we assign it value because of its utility, but only if it's used in that utility does it have value. So, for example, if I'm on a deserted island and I have no food, no water, no boat, no phone, no way to get off that island, and I have $1 billion worth of cash, $1 billion worth of gold, and $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, and $1 billion worth of oil, whatever, none of that's worth anything to me. I can't utilize it. The utility is gone. The only thing that I would want at that point would be food and water and maybe a boat and a phone to get off the island. Those would be the only things worth anything. Last night at dinner, I had some water I didn't finish drinking and it got poured out. It was worthless to me. But on a deserted island, I'd probably give that $1 billion of gold or whatever for that water. So that's how that works. So there's a little sidetrack on that. So anyway, gold was money. They issued the dollars. But what happened in 1971 is that he severed the ties of that. And what happened is that it threw the whole world into a tailspin because the dollar was backed by gold and all the currency of the world were pegged to the dollar. And when he removed that, then we no longer had any sort of anchor, and all we had was just free-floating currency that they could just print unlimited. Now, when they print unlimited, they do that in order to, as Bastiat said, create a system that legally allows them to plunder. So right now, if the government wants money, they have two choices. Remember, the government doesn't create anything. The government cannot give something it has not taken. So whenever you want the government to give you something, a new benefit, healthcare, college education, whatever that may be, fill in the blank, they can't give you something if they haven't taken it from somebody else. Just let that sink in for a second. So how does the government get things? Well, they take them, but they can only take so much. If they take too much, the whole system falls apart. So they take it through taxation, obviously. You got to pay your taxes. And of course, there's income taxes, there's property taxes, Social Security taxes, all kinds of taxes. And so that's the main way they do that. The problem is like I said, if they raise those taxes too high, then there's a revolt. They can get to about 50%, and that's probably about it. Now, the other thing that they can do, because again, they can only tax so high, then they steal arbitrarily and secretly, and they do that through inflation. So by printing a lot of money, they're stealing the value out of your existing currency. So you have 100,000 currency units, $100,000 in the bank 10 years ago. Today, you still have 100,000 currency units, $100,000 in the bank. But the problem is, 10 years ago, those things bought you a much bigger house than they buy you today. So even though the same currency units are there, they stole the value from that. Now, people don't like that. And so people are unhappy. They want to revolt. We also see, back to kind of the point, the legal plunder. We don't like that. We don't like the insider trading. We see all the grift and theft that's going on. And so we see the corruption that's there. And so people start to push back on that. And as things continue to get more corrupt, through the money system, corrupting things, people push back, and so then the government has to crack down even more. And so they pass laws, like, for example, the Bank Secrecy Act, passed in 1970. Now, of course, it's for your protection. It was passed in 1970 to combat money laundering. And, of course, they've changed it many, many times, most recently in 2020. But since 1970, they've changed it a bunch of times to address different sets of problems that they see, such as cryptocurrencies, for example. They pass things that require financial institutions to report what they call suspicious activity or suspicious activity reports, or they call them SARS reports. So there are certain things that would trigger these, like large cash transactions, deposits, wire transfers, things like that. Now, the banks have quotas on how many of these SARS reports they're supposed to fill out, and the Biden crime family supposedly had, like, I didn't look it up, hundreds of these, maybe even thousands, I forget, but lots of SARS reports filed against them for all of their banking transactions they were doing. But, of course, that was never investigated. But we have all these things, the Bank Secrecy Act. We have things like KYC, Know Your Customer, where they have to get all your ID information. We have things like AML, anti-money laundering. Of course, in 2001, they passed the Patriot Act. That was the day, obviously the Twin Towers attacked in September 11 was catastrophic, and a few thousand people, Americans, died. That was a horrible situation. But it was also the day that most of our freedom died. When they passed the Patriot Act, of course, they call it the Patriot Act. It's always named almost like the opposite of what they're giving you, sort of like when they created the Inflation Reduction Act by printing trillions of dollars. But this Patriot Act took away our freedoms with lots of ways they could do that. But ultimately what it all comes down to is surveillance and control, and it's this all-seeing eye of Sauron. They have to be able to see everything. They have to be able to control everything so they can control any sort of uprising against them, but of course all in the name of safety. Now, since this has happened, I'm not even talking about the fraud and legal plunder part, but just since we've left the gold standard, it started to tear the fabric of society apart because of the money being broken. We've seen a lot of things happen in regards to that. And mainly it all comes down to decreasing the quality of your life. So, for example, since 1971, when we got off the gold standard, we've seen productivity grow by almost 250%, but worker compensation or wages only grew by 115%. We've seen a 50-plus year decline in wages as a share of the economy's total income. So basically, in layman's terms, what that means is prices are getting more expensive and you're not making more money, which means the quality of your life is going down. We've seen real GDP, gross domestic product, per capita go up, while the median male income stayed flat, right? So the cost of living is going up, but your wages aren't. Median female income trended with median male income during the same time. So we don't really need to break that apart. It's about the same thing. And what happens when that happens? Well, when wages are going up, when cost of living is going up, but my wages are staying flat, then I have to work more. So now I have to work more hours to have the same quality of life, which means hours of my life are now being taken. So what do we do to combat that? Well, now 2 people in the household have to work. So now we have 2 couples working. What happens from there? Well, now instead of one person being home with the kids, now both people are gone, and so now the state gets to raise the kids. Now the parents don't have a good relationship with the kids. Now because both people are working, now they're both stressed out. They don't have good relationships. So then what happens? Well, then we have high divorce rate. The number one cause of divorce, I believe, is money, right? Fighting over money. You can't make enough money. We're stressed out over money. We're not spending enough time together. We don't get to go on vacations together because we can't afford it. We don't have any money. We've seen median home prices balloon as inflation continues to be a more, bigger and bigger problem. We're seeing banking crises happen. Obviously, the U.S. national debt is ballooning as well. We've seen the incarceration rate go up. I mean, think about that. The incarceration rate. Why? Well, because when it's harder to live, when my cost of living goes down, then maybe I'll turn to stealing and theft. Maybe because I'm growing up without parents at home and I'm just left to fend for myself, I join gangs and things like that. And so this starts to break down society. And I know that goes a little bit deep philosophically, but you have to kind of think about how big of an impact these things have.